Hello, friends. This is Dave Hurwitz and Peepo. I'm the executive editor at ClassicsToday.com. Peepo is not, but she thought she would drop in for this latest Haydn Symphony Crusade. Aren't you excited? Yes, can't you tell? She's absolutely thrilled. All right, I'm letting you go. Take it easy. Thank you. Ugh, God, hair. Anyway, here's the deal. We're up to Symphony number 30. Thank you. Yes, you can go. We're up to Symphony number 33 in C major, and this is really a cool symphony. I mean, they're all kind of interesting, as I think you've noticed, hopefully, but this one is really extraordinary. It's extraordinary for a number of reasons. First of all, it's in C major, just like number 32, but it couldn't be more different. And that's what makes these things so wonderful. In fact, you really ought to listen to 32 and 33 sort of next to each other, just so you can see the range of expression that Haydn gets out of his tiny orchestras with these very, very limited number of instruments. C major in Haydn usually means, from this point in his career, high horns, in C alto, as they're called, alto being high, basso being low. And the tension and sonority that this gives his orchestra is extraordinary, especially when you add the trumpets really playing mostly in unison with the horns at the same time. That gives the piece a very, very brilliant character. But the fascinating thing about this symphony is that it's actually a very quirky, even dark piece for much of its length. Really extraordinary. Usually in C major, at this time in the history of music, and even in Haydn's own works, that means something festive. And so the trumpets and timpani are all doing bum ba dum bum bum ba-dum, bum. You know, it's fanfares and military music and marches and things that bring to mind that kind of celebratory quality. But this symphony is totally different from that. And that's what makes it so interesting, because what we see is that Haydn is trying to find uses for these traditionally celebratory instruments, the trumpets, the timpani, the high horns, uses that are not typical. He's expanding the range of what musical instruments can do. And he does it in quite an exceptional way in this particular symphony. And he unifies the symphony as a whole work, as a four-movement entity whose movements can only belong to this symphony, even though they have, C major, an ordinary key, trumpets and drums, ordinary instruments, all the paraphernalia that we're used to. He has unified this special symphony by treating the trumpets and drums in a very, very particular way. And so we're going to spend a little time looking at that and seeing how he does it. Because it really is, it's like everything Haydn does. It's, on the one hand, incredibly simple and automatically audible, and it's all designed so that you can take it in without too much difficulty. On the other hand, it's just genius, because nobody ever thought of it before. And that's what makes this so cool. I mean, this is the kind of symphony where no one but Haydn could have written it. It's not exactly happy. It's not exactly sad. It's quirky. It's quirky and unusual. And it seeks to explore things beyond just, oh, it's happy, oh, it's sad. It's curious. It's puzzling. It's quizzical. It has all of those feelings to it. When people asked Haydn about his works, to summarize them in general, he would say in Latin, sunt bona mixta malis, which is also the name of one of his masses. No one knows why. That means that he would explain that to mean, what that means is sunt bona mixta malis means there's good mixed with bad. But the way he would express it is, he said there are good children and bad children, and now and then a changeling has snuck in amongst them. And this symphony is one of those changelings, I believe. And I think you will too once we're done hearing it. I really do. So let's talk about just one simple idea that Haydn uses to unify the entire work. All of the movements that have trumpets and drums, and that's the first, the minuet, which is third. Remember, in the last symphony, it came second. But here it's third, and then the finale. They all have the trumpets and drums and high horns in C alto. And he begins each movement with the same idea. What could be simpler than that? That idea is what I call a bounce. The bounce is just boom, like that. Or with a little pause between the it's boom, like that. Those three movements all begin with that same idea. And it's repeated frequently, so you get it into your head. And right away, you know you're doing Symphony Number 33. But the point about the bounce, the boink, thing, is that it's not a typical military fanfare. It's not a typical trumpet and drum rhythmic tattoo. It's a unique musical object that is special to this symphony. So I've prepared a little example. The performances here, by the way, are on Naxos. It's the same group that did number 32. Fabulous performances, by the way. Helmut Muller-Bruhl and the Cologne Chamber Orchestra. No continuo harpsichord. And we're going to hear, so I don't think there's a continuo harpsichord. I don't remember one. Well, let's put it this way. It didn't bother me because I couldn't hear it. Anyway, here's the bottom line. Listen to this. I have put together the bounce from the beginning of each of the three movements, just so you get a sense of what it is. It's amazing how simple that is. But again, no one had ever done it before. And so you have a completely marvelous musical motive for Haydn to develop as the symphony goes on. So here it is. It's a bounce. It goes boink, or boink, or, that's what it is. And that is what you might call the motto of the entire symphony. And he does it with the trumpets and drums, the instruments, frankly, where you would least expect it to happen. And it's simply splendid as a way to tell you that we're in a very special symphony. Now, the first movement is in the usual sonata form. That is, it has a first idea, a second idea, a development section, and then a recapitulation where everything shows up in the same key that it originally started in. Pay particular attention in this movement to the development section, where Haydn spends a lot of time in minor keys. The actual second subject of this movement is quite lovely. It's a long lyrical theme, which is unusual for Haydn. Quite often he likes to do what's called monothematic expositions. In other words, everything is based on the opening idea. But here he gives us a genuine second theme. And then in the development, it spends a lot of time probing more disturbing concepts, which is another idea that will unite this symphony later on, as you'll hear. So listen, I'm going to just run the first movement with no repeats so you can hear the whole thing and get a sense of it. Listen for the bounce. Listen for the minor keys in the middle in the development section. You know where they are. You'll hear them because the mood will darken, and the trumpets and drums will largely be absent because they couldn't play in those keys back in those days. But it's a very developmental kind of piece. But on the other hand, well, we'll talk about it on the other side. First movement. I'm sure you heard what I was talking about there. Now, one of the things about this first movement that's interesting is that it is, although it has substantial thematic material and a serious development section, it's not terribly long, and it's not terribly involved for a Haydn first movement. In fact, one of the things that's so interesting about this symphony too is how the weight of the symphonic argument is apportioned between the movements. The first movement is not going to be, emotionally speaking, the most complex or the most important in this particular symphony, as it was in number 32, which had a first movement, then the minuet immediately following, then the slow movement, which was the emotional heart of the work, and then a very zippy, almost throwaway finale. Here, everything is much more evenly balanced, and if anything, the mood intensifies as the work proceeds in a way that's different from what Haydn did in number 32. So, the second movement is for the strings only, no winds, no trumpets, no drums, no nothing, no horns, and it's in a minor key. And this is a particularly fabulous example of how to express really deep pathos, sadness, in a sonata form movement, because what we have here, it's elegantly done, so simple. It's the strategy that Mozart would adopt in most of his minor key works. That is, the first subject is in a minor key, the second subject is in a major key. And then when we come, there's an extended development section in this movement, and that development section has one job. It's to get us from the major key second subject back to the minor key for the return of the first subject in its usual minor key. But in this case, in the recapitulation, because everything is going to be in the same key, it stays that way. It stays in the minor key all the way to the end. And the result is extremely dark. I mean, it really is. It's a very emotionally gripping movement, and one that really gives lie to the idea that Haydn was always, the jolly old Papa Haydn who never expressed sadder emotions. I won't say deeper, because the equation of sadness with depth is stupid. I'm telling you that right now. Sad does not equal deep. Sad equals sad. Happiness can be just as profound, and Haydn's expression of happiness is sublime and profound. So let's just keep that in mind too. Here's the first subject. I just want you to hear the first subject in its rather dark minor key. Spooky, ain't it? Yeah. And now I want you to hear, what I've done is I've taken the second subject as it first appears in the exposition, and then after a little pause, I'm going to play it again as it appears in the recapitulation. And you can hear how it's completely transformed by being played in a minor key. But that is where the music is headed. It's not there yet. But I want you to hear the contrast between the two. That's the direction that Haydn is going. So now let's listen to the second subject, major, then minor. Quite a difference. I think you'll agree. And so now I'm going to run the whole movement, which it's going to last about 4 minutes. But you really need to hear how Haydn transitions from the happy part, the happy second subject, into the development section, and then back to the darkness of the first subject, and how he just stays there, just as Mozart almost invariably does in his minor key pieces. Musicologists call that tonal economy. That is, you don't zip around in other keys. Haydn is very, very unwilling to do this very often. Normally, he will find a reason to brighten the mood toward the end. But in this particular case, in many, in these exceptional cases, I wouldn't say there are many of them, but they're distinctive when they happen, he has decided to stick with the minor key all the way to the end and let the music end in darkness, which makes things very, very interesting on the other side. So here's the entire movement, all the way through. No repeats, though. I think that's one of the most beautiful and moving slow movements in all of these early Haydn symphonies. Now, after that, there's an effect. You know, one of the things about sonata form, the sonata style, is that it's a musical representation of cause and effect. Stuff happens. And in this case, what happens is that the music never quite regains its equilibrium. The first movement was rather amiable, as you'll probably agree, even though it had that minor key development section. Now the slow movement, which is really, really disturbing. And because the music has been disturbed, it tries to recapture, the tranquility and jollity of the opening movement, but it never quite gets there. It doesn't. And one of the ways we know it's not quite getting there is the rhythm is out of whack. From here on in, things are never quite organized the way you expect them to. This is particularly true of the minuet. This minuet, sometimes they're very regal, sometimes they're very pompous. This one is just out of kilter. It's out of kilter in the main body of the minuet, and it's out of kilter in the main in the middle section, the trio section. And it really is, again, it's disturbing, but in a different way. The rhythm never goes where you want it to. Remember, minuets have a very simple triple rhythm. It's just 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. Try counting like that when this starts and see where it gets you. Now here's the minuet, which begins with the same bounce that opened the first movement. It's bump, 2, 3, womp, womp. That's the minuet with the opening bounce. So here is the minuet proper, but boy, you're going to have a hard time counting even threes when you listen to this thing. Here it is. No way are you going to dance to that. It stumbles. It stumbles. And the reason it stumbles is because I believe the depth of sadness in that slow movement doesn't allow it to ignore what we've just heard. And the trio is even more messed up. The trio is just for strings, and it's in syncopated rhythm throughout. I mean, almost entirely throughout. I mean, there are a few moments where it isn't, but basically it's just chop, 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 chop. It's out of whack, completely out of whack. And Haydn makes sure you notice that it's out of whack by contrasting the violin parts, which are the ones that are off the beat, with an accompaniment which is resolutely on the beat, so that you hear just how confused it's getting. Here's the trio section. Very, very, very entertaining. I think you'll agree. But also, it's somehow unsettled. The whole minuet is completely unsettled, even though we're back in a major key. We're back doing happiness. And that is one of the things I think that's so wonderful about this symphony. It's ambivalence. It's is that happiness really believable? It's questioned. No composer before Haydn questioned, just the basics of the antithesis between, well, major keys are happy, minor keys are sad, in the way that Haydn does here. It's not exactly unhappy. You can't say it's unhappy, but it's not cheerful in a normative sense. And the finale goes even further. The finale is based entirely on that bounce. And the bounce is more bouncy than it was even previously, because the previous two bounces were sort of 1, 2, 3, bump, like that. There was like a little pause between the boink and the blap blap that comes later. But here, it's just boom, boom, boom. It's a completely unapologetic bounce. And, the previous Haydn finales, so many of them that we've heard, are these sort of like rollicking sea chanty things in 3/8 time. That is in a fast meter, and they're only a couple minutes long. This is a very substantial finale. If you play the whole thing with repeats, it lasts more than 4 minutes. It's highly developmental. It has a development section that recalls that of the first movement. It spends a lot of time in minor keys, really turbulent minor keys. It's not just, a little sort of flyaway, a little bit of spice, touch it up with a minor key for contrast. I mean, there's a real threat to this music, but it's like no other music anybody ever wrote. I mean, trying to describe it verbally is just going to get me as tripped up as the music is. So let me play the finale, the whole finale all the way through, no repeats as usual, and you'll hear exactly what I'm talking about. It's an extraordinary piece of music. What is it saying? That's the question. I mean, there's a real issue there about what music can express and how it expresses it, and how Haydn uses the trumpets and drums in a way which is rather unconventional for their day. Here it is. So yes, the ending is indeed happy. It ends cheerfully. The whole finale is cheerful. It's actually funny in parts. I mean, it's a hiccup. The movement that this really foreshadows is the finale of Beethoven's Second Symphony, the one that ends. It's another one of those. It's almost a bounce. I mean, it's one of these little motives that he uses. He doesn't unify the symphony with it the way Haydn does. In some ways, Haydn is a little bit more sophisticated than Beethoven was at the point of his Second Symphony. But it's a similar concept. It's a gesture. And it's a funny gesture. It's a funny gesture in Beethoven, and it's a funny gesture in Haydn. And it really, really gives this whole symphony a very offbeat and extraordinary character. An amazing character. So I really hope that you listen to this symphony at the same time that you listen to 32. They're only about, 17, 18 minutes each. You can listen to the two of them, without any problem. Have a drink, go to the bathroom between them, and then do the other one. It's amazing the variety and diversity of expression that Haydn gets using the same instruments, but in a completely different way. And he's enlarging the language of music in so doing. And that's what makes this crusade such a joy, for me anyway, and I hope for you too. So keep on listening, folks. Thanks so much for joining me. Take care.